It is rookie season, so of course it is time to start diving into some of the rookie film. I'm joined by one of the best film watchers of all of the Twitter sphere, and we're going to talk through 5 polarizing prospects that we either love or hate, and we're going to dive into the film and explain what makes them interesting ahead of this year's rookie draft. Of course, that film analyst is the great Jack Brentnall. Jack, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me. Busy kind of in the middle of draft season now, so this is where the fun starts.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favourite shows I get to do each year. I've had you on, I think this is the 3rd year now.
Yeah, it is.
It's always one of the ones that brings the most debate and the most questions come off the back of it. So let's dive in and talk some rookie film. We're going to start at the top with, I feel like, probably the most polarizing prospect in this class, Travis Hunter. From a fantasy perspective, nobody really knows quite what to do with him because we don't really know where he's going to be playing in the NFL. Talking purely as a wide receiver, Jack, what do you make of his tape? What do you make of him as a prospect?
Yeah, the guy who he reminds me of is Garrett Wilson. And I think actually there's a bit of a comparison in this class, how you've got him and Ted McMillan. It's kind of like the Garrett Wilson and Drake London situation all over again, but this time with Garrett Wilson also playing cornerback. Yeah, I really like him. He ended up as my wide receiver 1 when I went over and did my final film grades, which surprised me a little bit. He was my wide receiver 3 in summer. But he's got all of those things that you look for in a receiver prospect in the modern NFL. He's really fluid. He's great body control, great explosiveness. The long speed's good. It's not, he's not going to run a 4.3, but it's more than good enough. I don't think I've ever seen a guy with ball tracking and hands like him. Tet will get a lot of hype for his contested catch ability, but Hunter is 185 pounds, and that guy is he will moss guys at the catch point. He'll make adjustments. The amount of times he bailed Shedeur Sanders out is crazy. And he's really good after the catch. This is where I think the Wilson comp comes in. Really elusive, really slippery, explosive. So the kind of guy that you can just get the ball in his hands and good things will happen.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there for me, is that, yes, you can watch the tape and you see the route running ability, the playmaking ability, the ability to take any catch to the house at any point. But his contested catch ability and ability to manipulate his frame to consistently make catches away from his frame that he shouldn't even have a chance of getting near is some of the best I think I've ever seen. He's got unbelievable hands. And it's really, really exciting. I feel like we're sitting here listing all the attributes of a wide receiver that's kind of phenomenal, and it's like, yeah, he can do that, he can do that, he can do that. So, Jack, what can't he do? Where are there potential gaps in his game compared to other elite NFL wide receivers?
He's slim, he's 185 pounds, right? So, and he's 6'1". That build is slight, and you're not going to want to play him as your X, ask him to win consistently against press coverage. He can, but it's not where he's best. He's probably a slot or a Z, or your kind of move guy. You'll have in motion. I think there's still room to grow as a technician as well, which I think is perhaps a benefit as well as a concern. He's been playing 2 positions, right? So both as a corner and a receiver, there's room for growth. I think he improved this year. There's still room to grow in terms of he's very reliant on his athletic traits to win as a receiver. I think he can still improve there. And as much as he's elusive after the catch, he's not going to break a ton of tackles. So you look at a guy like Luther Burden, he will run through guys. Hunter is a make you miss guy. He's not a run through your face guy.
Yeah, I think when you say about the kind of technician side, I have real issues with his release package. I think he sometimes overcomplicates it, and I think he can sometimes needs to almost simplify it down and just pick a release and go with it. Yes, that can be kind of reduced in the NFL, as you said. Use him in motion, line him up in the slot as at Z, where he's not on the line of scrimmage, isn't going to see as much press coverage. But I still think that, when it's those got to have it downs, he's going to face press coverage, and you can't always get away from it. And I think if he works on that release, I think for me that is more of an area to work on, perhaps some of that route running fundamentals. I think the guy can still create separation. I think he will create separation at the next level. Let's kind of address the elephant in the room, though. I've been saying over the last 2 months that I think he's a better wide receiver than he is corner. I was really hopeful that he was going to come in and be a wide receiver that played some corner. Now, he's declared for the combine as a corner. I can see it. It's easier if you're an NFL team to say this is an every down corner and we'll have some package of plays for him on offense. That's easier to fit in. Is that where you see him going? Or do you think there's a world where he could be an every down wide receiver who plays some corner?
It's such a tricky one to see how it will end up, right? Because I have a high grade on him as a corner, but like we've seen this recently, cornerback play is volatile year to year. If you ask someone this year who the top 5 corners are, and you ask them last year, you'll get different answers. You ask people this year who your top 5 wide receivers are, and last year, yeah, there'll be a bit of difference, but like the consistency is much greater. You get paid more as a receiver. So he'll probably selfishly be like, I'd rather have an extra 10 million a year playing wide receiver when it comes to getting my second contract. I'm not reading too much into the combine thing. My theory there is he has to pick one position to play at the combine. If he does corner, he can then focus on wide receiver stuff at his pro day, and at his pro day, he'll obviously have Shedeur Sanders throwing the ball. So he may think, I'll look better at receiver on my pro day. Cornerback, I'll thrive at the combine. But yeah, he's going to tear my hair out from a fantasy perspective, because like I don't have any drafts that happened before the NFL draft in any of my dynasty leagues, and I am so thankful for that, because like the upside here is huge, but the risk is massive. I think every team's going to view him differently. If I had to bet, I think the league will see him more as a corner. But like I say, he's my wide receiver 1, he's my cornerback 1. This guy's got starting potential wherever he wants to play.
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating argument, and I feel like the way you laid out there about the corner and wide receiver at his pro day has made me feel so much more positive than I have probably over the last couple of weeks since the news broke. I keep coming back to this money thing, and you're not talking a small amount. You're talking about 15 million difference in terms of Justin Jefferson money to the contracts we're going to see over the next probably year or so for Stingley and Sauce Gardner and the like. That's a lot of money. And I just think when it comes down to it, I think he's going to be pushing to play wide receiver. And, I think there is still a world where he plays wide receiver. For fantasy, I think if he gets drafted and it's announced as a wide receiver, I think he's probably going to be a wide receiver 1. If he gets drafted as a corner and it gets announced as a corner, I think he's undraftable, because I just don't think I can spend the capital it's going to take to acquire him to then not know if I'm ever going to be able to use him in my starting lineup. And I can't believe we're here where we're saying this guy could be a top 3 pick in a Superflex league, or he could be completely undraftable. It's absolutely wild.
Yeah, I've never seen a guy with such a range of outcomes. But you're right. I think if he's a corner, if he's announced as a corner, yeah, even if he plays some package plays as a receiver, but like from a fantasy perspective, you're not going to know week to week if he's going to get those plays. It could be 2 or 3 plays. Like you're just playing with fire.
And he's going to end up going in the second, like early second, late first of drafts, even if he's drafted as a corner. And I just can't spend that amount of capital on a guy that I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to start. So yeah, I'm fascinated to see how it plays out. I love the player, but I have no idea where we're going to be ranking him or where we're going to be valuing him. One guy I am really, really intrigued to get your thoughts on. This is a guy that I am consistently lower than it feels like everybody I read, everybody I listen to, and every set of rankings that I look at. It's Isaiah Bond out of Texas. Crazy fast, natural deep threat, but I've got some serious concerns. So, Jack, are you a fan? Do you think he's potentially this second round pick that he seems to be touted at, or are you much lower than that?
If it's the back end of the second, maybe I'd take a gamble, but he is obviously Travis Hunter from a fantasy perspective with the two positions. There's more volatility and variety of outcomes, but Bond feels like from a purely receiver perspective, the range of outcomes there are just so vast. Like you say, he's God-given talent in terms of his movement skills. Like if you look at this receiver class, I think there's probably only one guy who can compete with him in terms of that on-field speed. I mean, he is just lightning in a bottle. He will beat defenses over the top, and it's the kind of speed that you just watch him and you're like, yeah, that will play on Sundays. Like that's not college speed, that's NFL speed. He's really smooth as well, which I love in a receiver. It's not just, okay, I'm going to burn you over the top. He can start and stop on a dime. He's got the explosiveness out of breaks. He will separate. And I think, at the end of the day, separating as a wide receiver is hugely important. And he's a good creator after the catch, right? So here you're seeing a lot of good stuff, a lot of stuff that translates really well. But I think the production has never matched the traits. He has one game with over 100 receiving yards in 3 years. And for a guy who is probably going to run in the 4.3s, who has good hands, great yak ability, has played at Alabama and Texas in two good offensive schemes, you're sat there thinking, well, hang on, like there's something here that's just not quite right. And that worries me, because if you're expecting this guy to be a 1,000-yard receiver at the NFL level and he's never been consistent at college, there's a lot of projection going on there.
Yeah, and I think that for me, that's where I'm struggling, is that, I can see glimpses. I see the speed. I think for a guy that, we normally see these straight line fast guys, they struggle with the kind of short area quickness, the agility. He's got that. I think, as you said, he is a smooth operator. I have questions over, you say he can separate. I think he relies on the speed to separate rather than the kind of the technician route running side to separate. I think there's times where he rounds routes to try and carry too much speed in. I think there's some fundamental stuff that he makes mistakes on time and time again. I think he's got some fantastic tracking the ball ability downfield. I think, we see plenty of fast wide receivers who can't track the ball, who can't catch deep. He doesn't have those issues, but it's like, I have serious concerns over him translating to a consistent weapon in the NFL. And I think it's one of these where I'm like, we almost have a player a year where it's like, you're probably a better NFL threat than a fantasy wide receiver. And the reason why I said threat and not receiver there is that I think the threat of him being a deep threat that, forces that safety to check and kind of sit over the top potentially, or at least be aware that, oh, they've got this really fast guy outside of me, I've got to keep an eye over there, and potentially opens up weapons elsewhere, is a real thing in the NFL. But that doesn't always carry over to fantasy points and production and things like that. And then I come back to like my rookie model, and it's not the be all and end all, but it's pretty accurate time and time again. And it's like pre-draft model, he's a 21st percentile player. And it just doesn't translate in terms of the stats I'm looking at that time and time again predict fantasy success. He doesn't hit it. And it's like, this is a guy who we're potentially talking about being a second round pick in the NFL draft. Yeah, he wasn't productive in college. And it's like, how many times are there guys that are not productive in college? And this isn't a guy that's had horrendous situations, horrendous quarterback play, not good offensive coordinators. Like, he's had some really good opportunity, yet hasn't produced. And we're now projecting production at the next level. I just really struggle with him as a prospect. And this is a guy I think I'm probably going to end up with like 0 shares of. At the moment, I've got him as my like wide receiver 13, 14. And I just I just can't get my head around where the appeal is. And it's like, yeah, okay, maybe in a best ball format where if he catches 2 deep balls in a game, he gets your starting lineup. But I just don't think he's going to be able to command consistent production in the NFL to warrant any fantasy relevancy at all.
Yeah, he's my wide receiver 9 at the moment. That is subject to change. So his defenders will say he was dealing with injuries this year, right? He had an ankle injury that limited him and kind of niggled even when he was playing. And I get that, and that is a fair point, but lots of players will deal with injuries. But also and I know this is kind of maybe a little bit of hearsay, but the reports you hear from both Texas and Alabama in terms of the character, the work ethic, there have been questions there. Now, obviously, there's nothing concrete, and those could be rumors, but it checks up with how he looks at times on film. Towards the end of the season, he just looked like he didn't want to be there. And yeah, there's so much potential there, but I think you're quite some way off having a high-level productive NFL receiver, because you're right. I think his big problem at the moment is there's no variation to his tempo when he's running. Like, he is a full-speed route runner in the worst way possible. Like, you want guys who vary their tempo, who know how to keep DBs on edge, actually use that speed. But because he's always been faster than everybody, he's never had to think about that. He's just like, I can just run fast, and like no one can keep up. And yes, he's fast by NFL standards, but like the disparity isn't the same as it was in high school or it was in college. And I think there's just you're projecting a lot of technical growth. And then there's the fitness question and the work ethic question. Sure, they could all come together and work, but that's one hell of a bet. That's my concern.
There's plenty of other guys in this draft I think have got similar upside and nowhere near the downside that I'd rather take a flyer on. But we're going to shift positions now and go and talk about some running backs. Cam Skattebo, he's a guy that has some huge fans, has some opposite of fans, shall we call them. It feels like you're either in or you're out, and there is no in between. So are you in or you're out, Jack?
I'm probably more on the out than the in. He's my RB9. What I will say on that is, like, if we were doing running back rankings based on how fun they are to watch, he'd be pretty much like up there in the conversation for RB1. Like, he plays the game in the way that you want to watch. Like, he is fun to watch. He's tough as nails. If you watch the Texas game, I think it was the Texas game, like, he was like being sick on the sideline and then coming back in and making plays. Like, this guy is like, he doesn't take plays off. He runs so hard and he breaks a ton of tackles. Second most broken tackles this year behind Bijan. Behind Gentry. I think it's like the third or fourth most in recent years, other than Bijan. He has good vision, right? And I think obviously that's always a key. And he runs with great pad level. Like, he's not a guy you want to, if you're a DB or a linebacker, he's not the guy you want to be meeting in the hole and trying to stop, because he just will run through you. And from a fantasy perspective, which I think is really important, he's got really soft hands. He's not the most dynamic, like, route runner technician, but he's got soft hands. He has plenty of experience being used as a check down, and he will produce pretty well in terms of kind of getting that yards after the catch stuff. My worry with him is the athleticism. Like, he's not fast. And yes, 40 times are massively overrated. We do this every year. It's not 40 times, it's play speed. There there are times you'll watch him and he'll be chased down by linebackers. And this is at college level. You go to the NFL level where all those linebackers are running a 4-4 and a 4-5. He doesn't have burst either, which I think is almost more concerning for me. I just don't see much burst there. And realistically, that's more important, that kind of 10, 15, 20-yard burst rather than the home run speed. And when you're 215 pounds, like this guy's not a 240-pound back. When you're 215 pounds, you're not massively elusive and you're not explosive. You're trying to thread a fairly small needle in terms of winning with power. And that would be my biggest worry with him.
Yeah, I think one of my like secret loves is powerful running backs that can catch the ball. Okay, it's the reason why I will never give up on Ramondre Stevenson. It's because I feel like they're the kind of hidden cheat code to fantasy, because any back that can be on the field, potential all 3 downs, see goal line work, see passing down work, they have the chance, if they get a workload, to suddenly be that diamond in the rough that comes out of nowhere. I kind of feel like Cam Skattebo's that guy. Like, he's powerful, he's good in short yardage situations. He is a competent receiver, and he's not just one of these guys that I sort of, when I talk about receiving backs, I have sort of 3 levels. There's guys who can only catch screens and checkdowns. There's guys that get lined up outside and can break down a DB and run proper routes. And then there's guys in the middle who can do more than just screens and checkdowns, but can't really line up outside, but can run competent routes from the backfield, angles and flares and things like that. And I feel like he's in that middle tier. But when it comes down to it, every time I see him in space, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you can translate to the NFL. It's like every time he has a clear runway to get through the first level, or maybe he breaks an arm tackle or something like that, he gets into that second level and you're like, right, okay, you see Jonathan Taylor, say, for example, and it's like he gets that runway, he's gone. Like, it's Derrick Henry. If he gets 3-4 yards, he's gone. It's just not there with this guy. And it's like, so what is he at the next level? Because I don't think he's going to be a good enough all-round back to be a kind of a workhorse. I don't think he's going to be good enough in space to be a third down back. I don't think he's going to be good enough to be an early down back with like a pass catching complement. So it's like, what role am I kind of suggesting he is in the NFL? And it's like, he could be like a 1B to a workhorse. And it's like, okay, so if I'm saying his best role in the NFL is a 1B to a guy who's going to see 70% of touches, that's not a guy that I could really get on board with. And I'm finding it really difficult, because there's bits I like, there's bits I don't like, but I just don't know if the upside is so limited that there's not enough to get me excited to want to draft him at the cost it's going to take to acquire him.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, he's not a great pass protector either. Like, he's very willing, but he's not great. Like, this is actually a class with lots of good pass protecting backs. Now, yes, you can teach pass protection, but like early in their career, if you're going to get on the field on third down, you need to be able to pass protect. In terms of a role, like, I wouldn't say this is a comp for him, but you could see him being like the Jamal Williams type guy, which obviously Jamal Williams had like a couple of years where he was very much fantasy relevant because he got plenty of red zone work, right? But I think he's just not a dynamic enough athlete. And like I say, I know people will fixate on things like the 40. I'm not too bothered by what he runs the 40 in. The NFL, with the way the NFL's going, right, you've got the best offenses can generate explosives on the ground. It was always explosives through the air. And we're now seeing the teams that do well get explosives on the ground. Or you have a Hall of Fame talent at quarterback, right? You've got to have one of those two things. Skattebo is an efficient singles and doubles hitter. he's not going to be the Saquon Barkley type who is going to rip off a 60-yarder every game. Like, he's not that. And that's fine. There's a role for players like him for sure. Like, he feels like the kind of guy who's going to stick around in the NFL for a while. Even without that speed, I don't really see much in terms of like bust potential. Like, it's the ceiling that's the concern. But I think like the toughness, the vision, that pad level, natural tackle breaking, like that's a nice floor you've got. I just don't see the ceiling that some others. I mean, I've seen people say he's like RB3. I just don't see it. I'm willing to be proven wrong here, but I don't see it with him at all.
To me, he's late career Frank Gore in that he's going to have very few tackles behind the line of scrimmage. He's consistently gets positive yardage, but his breakaway percentage is going to be minuscule because he just doesn't have that next gear as such. But talking of a guy that plays big, we're now going to talk about a guy that is big. Damien Martinez of Miami. This is I think the first name that out of your mouth when I asked you for some guys you wanted to talk about. So what is it about Martinez that makes you a big fan?
Oh, I love this guy. He's my RB4, which may be recklessly high. He was one of the last running backs I got to, and I was going in with kind of fair expectations, but he blew me out of the water with what he did. Now, you know, like you say, he's a big guy. Like, he's got NFL ready size, and he's got the strength. So you've ticked that box. So far, so good. The vision, I think, is fantastic. He reads the game so well behind the line of scrimmage, has a real understanding of space and how to manipulate second level defenders, which I think is a really important trait when you're working behind your offensive line. How you can press the hole, be patient, pace your runs, tempo your runs, force linebackers to commit, and then find the space. I think Martinez does that brilliantly. He's a tough runner, which you'd expect for a guy of his size, right? He's got great contact balance. He's not a guy you want to be tackling. But he's weirdly fluid for a guy that size. Like, he will make guys miss. Like, you know, he's not, you know, I don't know, Bijan Robinson, Ashton Genty, Jahmyr Gibbs type guy, right? Like, I'm not saying he's that, but he has enough there that makes me confident. He is a really good pass protector, which, yes, I know that doesn't get you points, but like, that gets you on the field in third downs. He has not had much work as a receiver, but his hands are decent. I don't think he's dynamic as a pass catcher, but if you're on the field and you can catch checkdowns, great. And like we said, he's good in short yardage. He's a tough runner. He has been consistently productive in college, both at Oregon State and Miami. Like, there's not many guys that have that NFL ready size, true junior, super productive, and he's just somehow going under the radar. Like, and I like I say, even if RB4 is high, I think he deserves to be mentioned, certainly in that kind of range more often.
Yeah, it feels like there's kind of 5 or 6 guys that get talked about as potentially the RB2, RB3 in this class, and there's a lot of names thrown around there, and I've yet to see Martinez's name in there, and I think perhaps I'm not quite there with you, but I can understand the traits that get you excited about it. As you said, his movement skills at 240 plus pounds is ridiculous. You know, he's got an impressive jump cut. He is fluid. I still think too often in space he doesn't use that mobility and he just tries to run people over. And I think that it's almost like he's like I'm 240 pounds, so I just have to run people over every time. And it's like, actually, sometimes you could evade the contact and keep running rather than, you know, yes, you run the guy over, but then it slows you down and then you get tackled by the next guy, kind of thing. I do have questions over the pass catching, and I get that you're saying he wasn't used very much in college. And sometimes it's like, yeah, that's, scheme dependent. We talk about like Wisconsin running backs back in the day never got used in the pass game, and it was like, okay, but actually when they get in the NFL, they're fine. I'm nervous about projecting that for him. So it's like, my concern is he only a 2-down workhorse that doesn't get on the field in third downs because of that pass catching ability? And are we talking about, a Gus Edwards who is phenomenal in terms of yards per carry and efficiency and all that kind of stuff, and he's great in those short yardage situations and can break a long run and all that kind of great stuff, but for fantasy never quite satisfies because he doesn't have that extra gear, that extra piece that comes from the receiving down work.
Yeah, he's never going to be a featured piece of your passing game. Like, I definitely agree there. I think he'll get on the field by virtue of that, certainly early on, by virtue of the pass protection. Like, that will get him on the field because I think coaches will be able to just trust him to get the job done. Yeah, he's never going to be a high volume receiver. I agree completely on the working out in space. He's more of a phone booth type runner. Like, you want him in like an inside zone duo kind of heavy scheme that just gets him running between the tackles. Yeah, once he gets out in space, it is almost just like the flat track bully type. I'm just gonna power over you. I think he can make guys miss, and that's why for me I have him kind of a couple of tiers ahead of Skattebo, because he maybe does resort to the power, but I've seen him be elusive. I think the other thing you'll hear is the long speed point, which I think it's fine. I don't think it's anything, but I think he had like a 75-yard run against Iowa State this year. Like, he can get those long runs.
I think it's fine for a 240-pound
amazing,
guy.
But yeah, there's not many guys at 240 pounds who are going to be running like a 4.3. So it's fine for what he is, right? I think it's always important when you're looking at a running back specifically. It's the case with wide receivers as well, but with running backs, kind of factoring in the speed score type thing of accounting for the weight, because expecting a guy who's 240 pounds to run the same as a guy who's 200 pounds is never going to be fair.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you made earlier as well about where he's best in terms of that inside zone duo. And it's like, 10, 15 years ago, maybe even less than that, we saw teams, the Shanahan schemes, McVay, where they'd have 80% of their runs would be one type. And, McVay would have the outside zone, and that was, everything was built off of that. And that's really not how most NFL teams run now. And it is about diversity of the run game. It is, yes, okay, duo is kind of ubiquitous. Everybody builds everything off of duo, and that's kind of the centerpiece run. And I think Martinez is fantastic in that. But what NFL teams, I think the two things that we're going to see in this draft class more than ever is we're going to see vision being bang the drum of that's so important. That's the asset that we need, and that kind of thing. And then we're going to see that ability to stay on the field no matter what type of run we're looking at. Can they work in that power scheme? Can they work in the gap, the duo, the inside outside zone? Can they deal with counters and in space? And I don't think teams are going to want to be giving tells as to, right, we're going to be running these three types of run because this is our back on the field. And I think that is a slight concern for me, because I don't see Martinez as a guy that can run a huge amount of like a one cut run in like an outside zone scheme.
Yeah, and he's not your wide zone runner. Like, he's not. He'd probably be fine, but it's not. That's not why he'll win.
Yeah, so that's my concern, is does that limit his ability to get on the field, because we're almost giving that slight tell of we're having to limit our run scheme because this guy is on the field as such.
I think this is where he'll be very much a landing spot dependent type guy, right? Like, there will be some teams that will be willing to kind of major in the kind of downhill run game.
Yeah.
And you think like I'm not saying he will go there, but like a Chargers type, gap scheme stuff, inside zone, he'll thrive there. But yeah, he's going to be an interesting one to see where he lands because running backs are always very much situations. That more than any other position, it feels like where I'm going to see them for fantasy will be so dependent on landing spot. But when a guy's that big, got that smooth footwork and great vision behind the line of scrimmage, I'm a sucker for those guys. Like,
Yeah.
They're the archetype I can't quit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want it to come across that I'm down on the guy. I really like the guy. I think I think he's got real potential. But there are like a couple of little niggles where I'm like, he's not the perfect prospect. But that's why you're probably going to be able to draft him in like third round of rookie drafts, if not later, than having to spend a first round pick on the guy. But the final guy we're going to talk about, Jack, Coleston, Loveland, prototypical size. Feels like some people are talking about him maybe as a top 10, top 15 pick in the NFL draft. Are you one of those that think this is a true difference maker at the position, or are you a little less excited about
that? I think drafting tight ends that early always scares me. But he is my tight end one. And I think we're overthinking. I say we as in like the draft community, are overthinking his evaluation. I think you watch his tape this year, like that Michigan offense was so bad. It was so bad. He's consistently getting open and the ball is either just not coming out or it's sailed like 20 yards over his head. He is an incredibly good athlete. He will separate and he is a receiving threat at the tight end position. Great hands, great body control. I think his kind of toughness is great. There's going to be, he's not Gronk, right? But with what he's got, I think he does a fine job. I think he's a fine blocker. He's not special at all. I think he's fine. He's serviceable. He's not the kind of guy that you're going, he's a big slot, right? I'm never playing him in line. Michigan did play him in line. He's fine. He's also one of the youngest prospects in the class. He turns 21 like a couple of weeks before the draft. So this is a guy who's been really productive in college. He's still very young. He, despite the fact that he didn't produce kind of Tyler Warren level numbers in terms of volume this year, he was still like the central part of Michigan's passing game. The stat that I thought was crazy was he was targeted on 37.6% of his routes, which is the most, if I've got this right, it's the most of any tight end since 2014.
That's like an elite wide receiver numbers.
I haven't checked like this year's class, but like I feel like that would probably be top of all the receivers. Like it's crazy, right? Like he's a proper kind of mismatch weapon. He's not in the Brock Bowers tier, right? Like there's obviously going to be the conversation when you're talking about kind of receiving tight ends, Brock Bowers, Kyle Pitts as prospect. I don't think he's in the Bowers tier. Like Bowers was where they're different for me is I think they're both similar level athletes, and I think they both have excellent hands. I think the difference for me is Bowers was better after the catch. I think Loveland is not as creative, but I think that's a creative issue rather than like an athleticism thing. But I don't know. I love Tyler Warren as well, but I just don't understand why people have called on. I mean, I've seen some people say he's not even the second tight end in the class. And I think we're just kind of, it's maybe prospect fatigue. I don't know. But he's still my tight end one, which we'll see how that turns out.
I'm torn between him and another tight end, and I'll tell you now, it's not Tyler Warren for my tight end one. I really like him as a prospect, and I think you hit on a really nice point of my question for tight ends is, are you a good enough receiver? And I think he ticks that box. I think he's a good enough route runner. I love his feel for zone. He understands, when to sit, when to keep running, all that kind of stuff, which I think is kind of next level for a lot of receivers and particularly tight ends. I sort of say, I don't care if you're not Gronk, if you're not like prime Mercedes Lewis in the run game. All I care about is, are you good enough that a team can keep you on the field and, in 12 personnel, and the defense has to match with base? Because we saw with a guy like, Dalton Kincaid, where the Bills were saying, we're going to use 11.5 personnel because Kincaid's good enough wide receiver, but is good enough in the run game. And teams just matched with nickel because they were like, well, he can't block. So he's just a wide receiver. I don't think Loveland's as bad as Kincaid is in terms of that. I think teams will have to honour him as a tight end. I think he's got good enough size. He's good enough blocking. He's willing, which is half the battle, let's be honest.
Yeah.
I just don't know if I see that elite ceiling. I don't think I know you said he's similar athlete to Brock Bowers. I think as a guy with ball in hands, movement ability, I think he's good. He's great. Brock Bowers is different tier for me. And I think that for me, I like him. I think he's a good prospect. I don't know if I can warrant spending, even in non-Titan premium leagues, we're talking like top 8 pick in current ADP. Like, if he's going to be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft, he's going to get pushed up in rookie drafts, and that scares me. If you could tell me right now I could draft him at the beginning of the second round, I'd be really excited. I'd be really interested, and I'd be really happy with that. I just don't know if I can get on board with the price it's going to cost to acquire him, as much as I like him as a prospect.
Yeah, the price I think is for him and Tyler Warren. I think is going to be really high because I think, as we talked about, Travis Hunter, if I was betting, will play corner. Which, when you then look at the rest of the wide receiver class, I think the next two guys are Luther Burden and Ted McMillan. I think the drop off is after that, and that void is likely to be filled in the NFL draft with, I think, these two tight ends. So if they're being drafted kind of purely on the basis of, well, those top 3 pass catchers have gone off the board, let's get the next 2 best, and it's Warren and Loveland, you could be looking at the top 20. I think like Denver feels like a landing spot for one of them. And if like you say, if you're saying top 20 pick for a tight end, they will go early in fantasy drafts. And yeah, there's always a volatility with a position that I feel like less comfortable drafting than receiver. But the thing that I guess gives me hope with Loveland is, like I say, he's still so young that if the part of his game that we're worried about is maybe that ability to be a good inline blocker. Like I say, I think he's solid, but like, what's the ceiling there? He's still only 20. There's physical maturity still left, whereas Tyler Warren, I think, is 23. So we're kind of comparing different kind of ages there. I think there's reason to believe that he could kind of add 5 to 10 pounds, add a bit more play strength, and become a better inline blocker. I don't think he's ever going to be, like we say, a difference maker. But as long as defenses can respect you, because like you say, if they can't, you might as well have a slot receiver on the field, right? If you're not going to be that value add in the run game. But I think he's just the best pass catcher at tight end for me. As much as Warren outproduced him, I think he's a better pass catcher, a better receiver. And I just think that's the most important part of the position these days.
No, I tend to agree. And that is it, though. 5 prospects. We reviewed each of them. We've talked through their strengths and weaknesses. Jack, remind anyone that is watching, hopefully everybody has found you and found your work. But if they haven't, where can they find you and your work?
Best place is Twitter or whatever we call it these days. Jack_Brentnall. I'm also doing stuff with a touchdown, and I will be doing a draft guide this year. We did one last year, and this one is going to be bigger and better than ever. So keep your eyes peeled for that when it comes out in the next month or so. It'll be out before the draft.
Absolutely. And if you're watching this and you haven't checked out Jack's work, I promise you, go and do it. You will not be disappointed. Jack is one of the best in the community. The volume of effort and time that he puts into this, I value very few people's opinions as highly as I value Jack. So go and check out his work. You will not be disappointed. And if you are here and you've not hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do that now. We'll be back. We got some stats, guys, next. We're going to talk through some prospects whose numbers I'm loving. And of course, rookie season is just around the corner. So we'll be diving into player previews for every single player you should be drafting in your rookie drafts. And we've got so much more because best ball season's around the corner as well. Hit that subscribe button. You will not be disappointed.